The service member is usually very interested in getting this over with and getting out of the service. And I've heard rumors that people are often told, hey, if you put things on the separation exam, we're going to keep you around for a while and check on you medically. So if you want to get out quickly, don't list things. Now, I don't know if that's true, but that's a recurring statement from lots of our clients. I suspect that when there's that much smoke, there must be some underlying fire. But for whatever the reason, there are lots of separation exams that we see where even though a condition was treated during service, it doesn't show up on the separation exam.
Welcome to the Victory Over VA podcast, a podcast about empowering veterans to overcome denied disability claims. Each week, we deliver critical insights to help you understand the disability process, veterans' benefits, and how to take control of your legal rights. Now here's your host, Tony Francis Jackson.
Welcome to Victory Over VA. This is your guide to unlocking veterans' disability benefits. If you're a veteran applying for benefits, be sure to subscribe to our podcast for the latest developments in VA disability. Hi, I'm Francis Jackson. This is Christian Terrison, and we're veterans disability attorneys at Jackson & MacNichol, where we've helped thousands of veterans to win millions of dollars in benefits. We created this podcast as a resource for veterans who are applying for disability benefits, but it's also for anyone with an interest in veterans' disability issues, whether you're a family member, a community member, a relative, or just someone who wants to support our veterans and to understand the veterans' benefits that are available. So without further ado, let's turn to today's topic and talk about
claiming conditions that are not on the separation exam. I would say that this is more often the case than the opposite.
not.
The separation exams, for a number of reasons, fail to catch many different conditions that have begun in service. But I guess to begin at the beginning, how does that happen, where you have these conditions that are getting missed on the exam?
As far as I can tell, it seems to be that unless the condition is really dramatically present at the time of the separation exam, number one, the physician who's doing the exam is typically in a hurry and not paying a lot of attention. Number two, the service member is usually very interested in getting this over with and getting out of the service. And I've heard rumors that people are often told, hey, if you put things on the separation exam, we're going to keep you around for a while and check on you medically. So if you want to get out quickly, don't list things. Now, I don't know that that's true, but that's a recurring statement from lots of our clients. I suspect that when there's that much smoke, there must be some underlying fire. But for whatever the reason, there are lots of separation exams that we see where even though a condition was treated during service, it doesn't show up on the separation exam.
Okay. And I guess what are the consequences for veterans with conditions that aren't on the separation exam who then go on to make disability claims?
Well, the consequences are usually that the VA, in a high proportion of those cases, uses that as an excuse to deny the claim. What will happen is, take a typical example where a veteran injures his back during service. You know, these are typically relatively young, relatively healthy people, often in the 18 to 25 range, and they'll have an injury in service. Backs are very common, back problems, and the physician in the service will dismiss this as a back strain, often without bothering to get x-rays and certainly without bothering to get an MRI, even in the period since MRIs have become available. And the separation exam will not reflect any kind of back problem. And then 20 years later, when these problems have become more and more frequent and more severe, the veteran will make a claim and say, I've got this bad back and the problem started in the service, variety of ways, but started in the service. And the VA claims examiner that's looking at it, adjudicating the claim, will say, this isn't on the service exit exam, and therefore it couldn't have been bothering you when you left the service, and this must be something that either happened in service but healed up and went away, or has happened to you since. Those seem to get about 50-50,
Right.
but one or the other of those will be in there. And so it's an ongoing problem.
So where do veterans begin overcoming that problem?
I think the best place for veterans to begin in overcoming that problem is to start out with a detailed explanation of how the problem has continued to bother them from the time it occurred in service right up until the day they're filing the claim. The kind of second level, if you will, of support for that is any medical records from the time of the injury in service right up to the date of filing of the claim. Unfortunately, one of the things that happens is that the medical folks have now reached a state where most of them don't keep records forever. 20 years ago, it was not uncommon to be able to go and get 20-year-old medical records. Now it's extremely uncommon. A lot of medical records are kept electronically and they're purged periodically to keep the storage space down and all those things. But I digress. The bottom line is it's important to have any medical records that can be reached or obtained. And if the records can't be obtained, but you can find the provider, it's useful to get a letter from that provider saying, the records are so old we don't have them anymore, but I treated this veteran back in 15 years ago, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, whatever it was. The third piece of evidence that is useful to get is statements from people who knew the veteran at the time he or she was in service, at the time he or she got out of the service, and in the periods since they got out of the service. It is very helpful to be able to show what the folks at the VA refer to as the continuity of symptomology, just meaning you had continuing symptoms over the time from the time you got hurt in service up until the time you filed a claim. Statements from people that you've seen on a regular basis in any of those periods are helpful. Wives, ex-wives, children, other relatives, friends that you've been friends with, particularly helpful if you have any Army buddies that you still see on a regular basis. I know for lots of people that's not the case, but there are some folks who served with others from the same geographic area and continue to see them after service. Those are particularly helpful because they can say, gee, I saw Jones back when he was in the service and injured his back, and he'd been complaining about it every year ever since then. I see him at least a couple times a year. He's always complaining about his back. That's the kind of stuff that makes it hard for the VA to say that either you hurt your back in the service and the problem went away, or really you didn't have any serious problem in the service and you've injured it since then. Those are their two favorite excuses.
And hearing you talk about sort of the buddy statements and lay evidence, one thing that I wanted to mention too is, you've been talking about how the statements focus on what people can observe. I heard him complain about his back, or somebody who says, oh, I can't lift that because it'll throw out my back. I've had this problem since the service. There's a fine line between what types of evidence lay people can offer, that's people who aren't doctors, versus, somebody writing a statement that says, oh yes, he's had a herniated disc since 1987. If you haven't seen an MRI and you aren't a doctor, you're not in a position to make that type of diagnosis. So, stick to the things that, the behaviors almost, and the symptoms that are really clearly there, because it doesn't take much.
Yep. I saw Mr. Jones pick up a box and he winced at the pain. I heard him complain about the pain. I saw him go and take ibuprofen. All those kinds of things that we all recognize as indicators of pain, but that are subject to, as you put it, reporting by non-physicians. Those are the kinds of things that are helpful to get in statement.
Yeah, every now and again we'll get the spouse who thinks they're being helpful and sort of regurgitates what the medical records say and signs and dates it, and that's not going to get you anywhere. What we want to hear is about how they won't sit in their favorite recliner anymore because every time they try to get out of it, it throws their back out, and
Yep.
they'd rather sit in a wooden chair or on the floor or something.
Yep,
That's the level of symptom
that are
will-
helpful. Yep.
Yeah. Now, does the timeline of symptom onset after discharge play a role in sort of looking at it, the nexus when there's a missed condition on a separation exam?
It may. One of the things that the VA is always looking at is how steadily these symptoms occur, how consistently they occur. If you have a situation where someone, again, to use a common example, hurts their back in service, but doesn't get any treatment until 20 years later after they have had a documented workers' comp paid for injury to the back after service, it's just much harder to argue that really that goes back to their injury in service. Mm-hmm. It's very important to try to establish that the symptoms have persisted since service, and particularly that the symptoms predate any post-service injury. You know, the VA loves to say, Mr. Jones hurt his back at work, and it's really all about that. It has nothing to do with the fact that he actually tore up his back while he was in the service. It is important in those kinds of situations to try to demonstrate in any way you can that the problem with the back continued after service and that there is evidence of that before this later injury that the VA is trying to rely on. Usually, there will be someone somewhere who can say that they saw this person having back problems in the period between the time of the injury in service and any later injury. And that's important. The more evidence, medical and non-medical, you can get to support that, the better.
Now, you have a separation exam that doesn't have the diagnosis. You've got a current medical documentation showing the affirmative diagnosis. Now, oftentimes, that's a recipe for a compensation and pension examination. You've established the diagnosis, and now what's missing is a medical opinion tying it all together. So for veterans who find themselves in that situation, heading towards a CMP exam, what are some ways they can make sure they get their point across in the CMP exam? Because really, it's going to focus a lot on past events and past symptoms. And we both know those are not strengths of CMP examiners, to put it mildly.
Yes. I think there are really two things that they have to focus on. For everyone, no matter what, they need to get the history clearly in their minds and present it carefully to the CMP examiner. Say, yep, I hurt my back in the service, and these are the problems I've had since then. These are the types of things that when I do them, it hurts. When I do them, or when I try to do them and can't, it hurts. And it is extremely helpful if you can get any kind of medical documentation for post-service treatment that predates the current treatment. So, for example, if you were in the service in 1970 and hurt your back, and it's now 2024, and you're saying, gee, I hurt my back in the service, and it's bothered me all this time, and now it's really bothering me, I'm making a claim. The VA's initial reaction will be to say, look, it's been over 40 years. This can't be related to what happened in service. So any medical evidence that you can get showing that you've had treatment for your back in the intervening period is important to lay hands on to the greatest extent possible and show that to the VA examiner. Say, look, I brought with me my records showing that I've been treated for the last 30 years for this back problem, and it's finally just gotten so bad, doc, that I'm making a claim.
What about for those veterans who, they proceed through the claim, they do what they can as far as marshaling the evidence and explaining everything to the VA, and they're denied? is there any material difference in the appeal process when you're dealing with a condition that wasn't on the separation exam?
Not in any technical sense. I mean, in a real world sense, yes, it's harder, and you need to be more careful about putting together the greatest amount of supporting evidence that you can, showing the things we've been talking about: lay statements about intervening back problems, medical evidence about intervening back problems. The more of that stuff you can marshal, the better. But there's no technical difference. It's simply a question of needing to overcome a higher barrier in terms of the persuasive effect of the evidence.
And is there, or are there, any characteristics that you can point to that would suggest a veteran should seek expert help in those situations, whether a VSO or a VA disability attorney?
I think if the claim gets to the point that it's been presented and denied, and the condition is not on the exit exam, you're probably going to need help with that claim. It is not going to be one that is straightforward enough for most people to successfully manage it on their own. The short answer to your question is yes, you should get help, and you can certainly get help from a veteran service organization. In many of those cases, I think it will be more helpful to get from an experienced attorney who routinely puts together information and argument to support claims, whether it's someone who specializes in veterans' disability benefits or simply an attorney who has experience dealing with medical claims in the workers' comp or personal injury or any other setting. But it's just that for many people, it's too daunting a task, or it's a task they simply don't fully understand and appreciate, to pull together the evidence that would show that even though this wasn't on the service exit exam, it in fact occurred in service and has been bothersome since service and is continuing to be bothersome, and it's all the same problem, even if there have been incidents since service that exacerbated it.
And also, I guess on a related note, some of the experts we work with do a really great job of being able to tie all that together, because, like, for instance, looking at a particular injury in service and being able to medically make that connection between the injury in service and what happened later. I'm thinking of one expert in particular we've worked with who does a great job of saying, a spine injury at this age with these immediate symptoms is more likely to be of this type of severity, which later in life is going to lead to these types of worsening conditions. And the impact on body mechanics, how, throwing your posture off as a young person, it's the diverging path. It only gets worse as you get older. And that's been very powerful evidence to have in a number of these types of cases, at least that I've worked on.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct.
Yeah. Well, we're just about out of time for today. I didn't know if you had any last thoughts on those conditions that are missed on the separation exam. It really seems to be the rule rather than the exception, at least as far as the ones that make it to our desks.
Yeah, it is unfortunate, but it does seem to happen a lot. Now, all I can really say is, get help with those claims if they're initially denied. Those are tough ones.
All right. Well, thank you for tuning into another episode of Victory Over VA. Please be sure to subscribe and join us again next week.
We'll hope to see you then.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Victory Over VA podcast. Make sure to visit our website, veteransbenefits.com/podcast, where you can subscribe to the show in iTunes, Spotify, or via RSS, so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes, or if you'd simply tell a friend about the show, that would help us out too. If you like this show, you might want to check out our free consultation to see how we can help you with your denied claim. Simply go to veteransbenefits.com and fill out the form. You fought for us. Now let us fight for you. And be sure to tune in next week for our next episode.